The encounter. It was a typical afternoon as I walked down a bustling street, lost in thought, when something unusual caught my eye. In the corner of my vision, just at the edge of the sidewalk, I saw a tiny figure curled up by the curb, a little kitten. Its fur was matted and dirty, and its eyes appeared dull, like it had been fighting for survival. The kitten lay motionless on the cracked pavement, so small and fragile that it seemed to be swallowed by the harsh reality of the street. At first, I kept walking. I had my own worries, my own agenda, and the thought of stopping never even crossed my mind. I didn't really like cats. I never considered having one, and I couldn't fathom the idea of taking care of an animal, especially one in such a sorry state. I walked past, but then something tugged at me, a faint feeling I couldn't ignore. I glanced back, wondering if I had imagined it. But no, there it was. The kitten, so pitiful, alone in a sea of indifferent passersby. It was as if the entire world was moving forward without a single person noticing this tiny soul in need. People walked past it without a second glance, engrossed in their own lives, in their own problems. No one stopped. No one even slowed down. I stood there, frozen in the middle of the sidewalk, torn between the apathy of the world around me and the helplessness of that little kitten. I could feel my heart aching as I watched it lie there, so still, its tiny chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. A wave of guilt washed over me. Could I really just keep walking? Could I ignore a life that was clearly struggling, fighting against the odds? I wasn't sure what it was that changed in me in that moment, but I couldn't leave. I couldn't let that kitten be alone, suffering, while I carried on with my day. I don't know how long I stood there, but the feeling inside me grew stronger with each passing second. It was clear that the kitten was in trouble. It wasn't just lying there. It was waiting. Waiting for help. Waiting for someone to see it, to care enough to make a difference. I hadn't taken care of any pets before, and honestly, I was a little scared. I didn't know what to do, how to help. But leaving it there wasn't an option. After what seemed like forever, I walked up to the kitten slowly, carefully, as though I might startle it. I bent down to get a closer look. Its fur was tangled and dirty, and it looked so frail, like it didn't have the strength to move. There was something about its eyes, though something so vulnerable yet filled with a flicker of trust. It was as if it had given up on the world, and in that moment, it was giving me a chance to prove that kindness still existed. I scooped the kitten gently into my arms, feeling its fragile body shiver against my chest. As I held it, I could hear the soft mewling sound that came from its throat, a sound so faint it was barely audible. My heart broke for it. I didn't know what had happened to this poor creature, what had led it to this state of abandonment, but I knew that I had to act. The next few moments were a blur. I walked with the kitten to a nearby hotel, unsure of where to go or what to do, but determined to make sure it didn't die alone on the street. I could hear its labored breathing as I carried it. When I reached the hotel, I asked for a room where I could keep it for a while, just to give it some rest, some peace. The receptionist looked at me with a mixture of concern and disbelief, but didn't question me. I laid the kitten down on a soft towel, and it just lay there, barely moving. I tried to give it some water, but it didn't react, didn't even lift its head. It was clear that the little creature was in dire need of help, but I wasn't sure if it would survive the night. I stared at the kitten, my mind racing with questions. What if it didn't make it? What if I didn't know enough to save it? I wasn't a vet, and I wasn't experienced with animals, but I couldn't just walk away. I had to try. I knew I needed professional help. There was no way I could care for it on my own. I took the kitten in my arms again and set off to find a nearby animal hospital. My mind was filled with doubt, with fear, but there was also a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could make a difference. Maybe, despite everything, this kitten could still survive. When we arrived at the hospital, the staff rushed to take the kitten from me. They checked its vitals, its breathing, and began to assess the extent of its condition. The doctor looked at me with serious eyes. "It's in bad shape," she said. "Its eyes and nose are infected, and it's severely malnourished. We'll do what we can, but I can't make any promises." I felt a knot in my stomach. There was so much uncertainty, so much fear, but I refused to give up on it now. The doctor administered some medication and gave it a little food. It took a while, but eventually, the kitten started to eat. I watched in amazement as it hungrily devoured the food. It was a small victory, but to me, it felt like the world. The kitten was fighting. I couldn't stay at the hospital forever, though. I had plans to travel to Nanjing, and I had already booked my train ticket. But I couldn't bear to leave the kitten behind. Not now, not when it had started to show signs of recovery. So I canceled my trip and decided to take a rideshare instead, carrying the kitten with me in a box. It was a strange feeling, traveling with something so small, so fragile, but it felt like the right decision. The kitten was quiet during the trip, sleeping peacefully in its box, and I found myself looking at it often, wondering how much longer it would survive. Would it get better, or was I simply prolonging the inevitable? As we arrived in Nanjing, the kitten stirred. It seemed to have gained a little energy. It ate more, mewed softly, and even began to show more life. I couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. This little one was a fighter, a fighter's will to live. It wasn't long before the little kitten began to show more signs of improvement. When I first noticed that it was more energetic, I felt a surge of hope in my heart. It was eating with a greater appetite, and its tiny meows became more frequent. Despite the severity of its condition, I couldn't help but feel that it had a strong will to live. I woke up the next morning, excited to feed the kitten, when I noticed something was wrong. It wasn't responding to me as it had the previous day. It couldn't even lift its head, and its breathing was shallow and weak. Panic rushed through me as I realized that things weren't as stable as I had hoped. I knew I had to act quickly. I rushed it to the hospital, my heart pounding. When we arrived, the doctor quickly assessed the situation. The kitten's body temperature had dropped dangerously low, and the prognosis wasn't good. The doctor even told me that there was a high chance it wouldn't survive. I stood there, helpless and desperate, but I couldn't give up. I made the decision to do whatever it took. The doctor began the IV treatment and prescribed more medication. I watched as the kitten lay on the bed, barely moving. Several times throughout the day, I thought it might be too late, but the kitten held on. By the afternoon, it managed to get up and eat on its own. I could barely believe it. The doctor had warned me that things might not turn out this way, but to see the kitten fighting back against the odds gave me a renewed sense of purpose. I knew that it wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Despite the challenges, despite everything, this little kitten was showing me the power of resilience. A journey of hope. As the days passed, the kitten, whom I had named Juju, slowly began to heal. His once dull eyes sparkled with energy, and his appetite grew stronger. His small, injured leg, which had been a source of concern, started to heal as well. I began to feel an overwhelming sense of pride. Juju was not only surviving, he was thriving. One night, after a particularly challenging day, I sat beside him and watched as he played with a small toy I had bought for him. It was a simple moment, but it felt like a miracle. To see him so full of life, so vibrant after everything he had been through, was nothing short of incredible. Through this journey, Juju taught me something profound. Life is fragile, and it's easy to overlook the small, vulnerable things around us. But sometimes, a little kindness and a little patience can make all the difference. Juju wasn't just a kitten. He was a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there's always a chance for something beautiful to grow. And in the end, as I looked at Juju, healthy and full of life, I realized that this little creature had changed me. He had taught me the value of compassion, of giving without expecting anything in return, and of never giving up, no matter how hard the road may seem. Juju had fought against the odds, and in doing so, He had shown me that even the smallest act of kindness can have the greatest impact. It was a lesson I would carry with me for the rest of my life. The fight for survival. The morning after I arrived in Nanjing with the kitten felt different. The soft hum of the city outside seemed distant compared to the pounding of my own heart as I checked on Juju. The previous evening, he had seemed so full of life, so spirited, eating eagerly and mewing gently in my hands. But now, as I knelt by his bed, I noticed something was terribly wrong. His little body lay still, his eyes glazed over and unresponsive. His breathing was shallow, too faint for me to feel at ease. My pulse quickened as I watched his tiny chest rise and fall, uncertain whether it was merely a reflex or the last signs of life. Panic gripped me instantly. How could he have gone from eating heartily to being so lifeless within hours? The hope I'd clung to only the day before seemed to fade as quickly as it had come. I could feel the weight of the situation settle heavily in my chest. This wasn't the kitten I'd rescued from the street. This was a fragile soul on the edge of life, teetering dangerously close to the brink. I knew I couldn't waste time. I rushed to scoop Juju into my arms, my heart racing as I gently cradled him, feeling his small body shiver under my hands. The moment I reached the hospital, I handed him over to the staff, my voice trembling as I explained the situation. He's so weak. He's not moving, not eating. I looked at the doctor desperately, but in my gut, I feared it might be too late. The look in the doctor's eyes mirrored my own fear. She immediately started examining him, and I watched as she checked his vitals, then checked again, her brow furrowed in concern. His body temperature is dangerously low, she said, her voice grave. This kitten's condition is very critical. Sitting in the sterile white waiting room, the seconds felt like hours. Every sound around me seemed muffled, drowned by the urgency of my thoughts. What if I hadn't taken the time to stop for him? What if I had simply walked by and ignored the faint sound of his mewing? What if I was too late to save him? I squeezed my hands together, trying to keep from falling apart. Finally, the doctor returned with news. We've managed to stabilize him for now, but it's still touch and go. His temperature was dangerously low, below 35 degrees Celsius. We're giving him IV fluids and medications to help with the infections. But she paused, her face somber. Even if he survives, it will require intensive care for several days, maybe longer. My chest tightened at her words. The road ahead felt so uncertain. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let him down now. He had made it this far. I had seen the fight in his eyes when he was at his weakest. I had to give him a chance. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I would do whatever it took to keep him alive. As the hours passed, I sat by his side, never leaving, watching every slow breath he took. I could see the slow, shallow rise and fall of his chest, like a tiny beacon in the dark. The doctor had told me he might not make it, that his odds were slim. But I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. I knew it wasn't time to say goodbye. I had seen him fight once before, on the cold sidewalk, and now I was determined to help him fight again. By the time the IV was finished, and the kitten had been stabilized enough to move, I stayed by his side constantly, talking softly to him, offering comfort in the only way I knew how. When the doctor saw how much effort he was putting into his recovery, she was astonished. "We didn't expect him to respond like this," she said, her eyes wide with surprise. "He's stronger than we thought." Hearing this, I felt a surge of hope. Despite the odds, Juju was showing resilience. He was fighting, and in those small moments, when he raised his head slightly, when his eyes fluttered open for just a moment, I saw his determination. It reminded me that sometimes, even when everything seems impossible, a flicker of hope can turn into something much stronger. The next few days were long, filled with constant visits to the hospital. I watched Juju closely, staying vigilant in every moment. He would sleep a lot, his small body too weak to do much more than rest. But in the quiet of those hospital rooms, where time seemed to crawl, I found a strange kind of peace. It wasn't a peace born from certainty, but from the shared fight between me and the kitten. We were in this together. One afternoon, as I sat by his side, watching his tiny body sleep, I was overcome with the realization that this little creature had already come so far. When I first found him on that cold, lonely street, I had no idea what would become of him. But now, after seeing the doctor's hopeful words, after watching his tiny paws twitch as if reaching for something, I couldn't help but believe that he might just make it. Maybe, against all odds, he was going to pull through. In the following days, Juju began to show more signs of life. He started eating on his own, his tiny paws gripping the food dish with determination. He even managed a soft meow here and there. Though weak, it was enough to make my heart swell with relief. The road ahead was still uncertain, and there were still many hurdles to cross. But I knew in my heart that I wasn't alone in this. Juju was fighting with everything he had, and I would do the same. I continued my visits to the hospital, holding his paw when it seemed like he needed reassurance. When he opened his eyes and looked up at me, I could see the trust in those deep brown eyes. And in those moments, I knew that I couldn't stop now. This kitten had more fight in him than I had ever expected. And in some strange way, I felt like I was fighting alongside him, sharing the burden of his recovery. Despite the setbacks and the fear that gnawed at me, I began to see a change. Juju was no longer the lifeless, sickly kitten I had found by the roadside. He was becoming stronger each day. The spark of life that had been nearly extinguished was now glowing again, and with each small victory, whether it was a bite of food or a soft meow, I knew we were on the right path. He was making it, and I wasn't going to let him stop now. A miracle of resilience. As the days stretched on, something extraordinary began to unfold. It was almost as if Juju, this tiny, fragile kitten, had decided that he wasn't going to be defined by the odds stacked against him. Day by day, he grew stronger. The little, once frail body that had seemed so close to giving up now moved with purpose, his eyes more vibrant, his appetite growing with every meal. The small limp in his step, a reminder of his past injuries, didn't stop him from exploring more of the space around him. With each tiny victory, my belief in him, and in the resilience of life itself, deepened. I remember one particular morning when Juju, for the first time since I had rescued him, actually climbed into my lap. He sat there quietly, his small head resting against my chest as he gazed up at me with those bright eyes, filled with trust. I had never experienced anything like that before. It wasn't just the physical healing that I was witnessing. It was something deeper. This little soul, so weak and vulnerable, had learned to trust again. He had learned to fight, not just for survival, but for the chance at a life filled with love, warmth, and care. Juju had changed not only in body, but in spirit. And in those quiet moments, when he curled up beside me and purred softly, I realized just how much he had taught me. I had expected to rescue him, to save him from the streets, from his illness, from his fear. But in reality, he had saved me in ways I never imagined. He had shown me the power of second chances, the importance of compassion, and the incredible strength that exists in even the smallest beings. Through his struggle, I had learned that hope wasn't just something you hold onto. It's something you build, piece by piece, even when the world feels like it's falling apart. A week later, when I finally brought Juju home, I could hardly believe how far he had come. He was no longer the sickly kitten I had found on the side of the road. He was a little ball of energy, filled with curiosity and a newfound joy for life. His leg, though still a bit weak, no longer seemed to limit him. He would chase after toys with the same enthusiasm as any healthy kitten, and though he still limped occasionally, he walked with his head held high, as if he knew that he had conquered something extraordinary. But what truly struck me was the bond we had formed. It wasn't just about healing his body. It was about giving him a home, a place where he could feel safe, loved, and free to be himself. It was about showing him that he wasn't alone in this world, that there was someone who would stand by him through every challenge, every setback. And in return, Juju had shown me the power of persistence, the beauty of unconditional love, and the strength that comes from never giving up, no matter how difficult the journey. I often think back to the moment I first saw him on that lonely street, so small, so helpless, and I wonder how many others walked by without even noticing. It's easy to be caught up in the rush of life, to overlook the small things, the quiet moments, the unnoticed souls. But sometimes it only takes one person to stop, to see, to act. And in doing so, they not only change the life of another, but their own as well. Juju had come into my life like a whisper, so soft, so fragile, yet filled with the quiet strength of someone who was meant to be there. I had thought I was saving him, but in truth he had saved me. And together, we learned that no matter how broken or abandoned we may feel, there is always a way to heal. There is always a way to fight. And there is always hope, if we are brave enough to believe in it. As Juju curled up beside me that evening, his small body warm and content, I looked down at him and smiled. I knew that this was only the beginning of our journey together. No matter where life would take us, I knew one thing for certain. We would face it together, stronger than before, and with a heart full of gratitude for the lessons we had learned from each other. In the end, I realized that sometimes the greatest miracles aren't the ones we expect to see. They're the quiet ones, the moments of trust, the slow recovery, and the shared courage of two souls who find strength in one another against all odds. And with that thought, I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the journey behind me and the promise of the future ahead. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.